Okay, here we are with our front end put back together, and I want to go over something that I get asked questions about a lot, and that is the front fork alignment. And there's a lot of different ways, and lots of techs have their different methods and things like that. But let me just tell you what's worked for me very well over the years. Now, generally, with the Japanese motorcycle, the end of the axle will come flush with the right side lug, with the outside of the right side lug. The lug is the lower part of the fork right here, this cast aluminum piece. With the KTM, because they use a nut on the end of the axle, they don't really give you an alignment mark unless KTM wants you to come flush with the very end of that, because that seems to be where it lands. And I was just going to say, if you don't have an alignment mark, or in the case that you're working on a Japanese bike, you may see that it comes just shy of flush or just beyond flush, where the fork leg finds its comfy spot. You can see that walks around on that axle, and it's meant to do that. Let me just explain quickly how this works. So on this axle, there's a shoulder that presses up against this wheel collar. And when you tighten the bolt on this side, it pulls the axle through the wheel, through the center of the wheel. It presses against the wheel collar, which presses against a spacer in the center of the hub, which presses against this wheel collar, which then presses against this wheel lug. And so when you tighten this bolt, you essentially tighten the axle up to this wheel lug as one solid piece. And so this fork can't walk around. It's in a fixed position. It's held between the nut, or in this case on the KTM, it's a bolt that threads into the axle, whichever it is, the shoulder bolt or a flange nut. Either way, it's going to be fixed between the fastener and the wheel collar. And so it cannot walk around. It's fixed in its location. And that's due to the reason it has the caliper on this side. It cannot move. It has to be in a fixed location. Now, on the right side of the machine, like I said, this fork can move. It's not fixed. And if you do the wheel installation incorrectly, and let's just say you don't pay attention and your lug is hanging up on your axle slightly, and you can see I'm forcing that in, but let's just say it did stay in while you put the axle through and it hung up somehow, and it puts extra pressure on that lower fork stanchion. Well, that in turn puts a lot of pressure on the fork slider, the upper and the lower, or if you call it the inner and outer fork slider. That'll put a lot of pressure on that. It will also cause undue wear or unnecessary wear on the fork seal. It will cause the fork seal to wear out prematurely, as well as just cause a poor performing front end. Your front end will bind and feel stiff, especially toward the lower part of the stroke. So let's just go through this quickly. The first thing I do, let's tighten up this nut. So let's set our tension on the axle. This is the correct procedure. Let's snug that up. Now that's set, the axle cannot move. The wheel can't move. We're just going to zip these in. Make sure that our pinch bolts are snug. And the last thing that we're going to do is make sure that this fork just sets in its natural position. It just wants to set in its comfy position. You can see this one moves quite easily. I'm just going to let it set where it wants to set, where it wants to line up with the bushings in the fork. And we'll tighten these last. So when you put a front wheel on, the correct procedure is the fastener, the left side pinch bolts, let it find flush or let it find its neutral position with no pressure one way or the other, and the right side pinch bolts. That's the correct procedure.